When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. Not because it didn't hurt, it did, but because after all the years of giving, loving, and forgiving, I had finally learned what silence really means. It was a quiet Saturday morning. The house smelled of coffee and cinnamon rolls. I'd baked them early, hoping to surprise everyone. It used to make my children happy when I did that. The smell alone would pull them into the kitchen. But that morning, no one came. I heard them whispering in the living room, my son, his wife, and my daughter. Their voices were low, but my heart already knew. When you're a mother, you can feel when something is about to break. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked in, still wearing my old blue sweater. My son didn't look up at first. My daughter-in-law's eyes were nervous. And then she said it, softly, like she was afraid of her own words. "Mom, maybe it's time you had your own place. You've done enough for us." The words hung in the air. I tried to smile. I really did. For a moment, I thought about all the nights I stayed up when they were sick, the birthdays I planned even when we couldn't afford cake, the years I worked 2 jobs so they could have a better life. But none of that seemed to matter now. The room was silent. My son shifted uncomfortably, rubbing his hands together. My daughter looked down, and I just stood there, holding the towel, feeling my heart slow down, one beat at a time. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to tell them I wasn't trying to be in the way, that I only wanted to be close, to help, to feel like I still belonged somewhere. But instead, I said, "Okay." That one word carried all my pain, all my love, and all the years that led to that moment. When I turned to walk away, I noticed the framed photo on the wall, the one from when they were little. Their smiles were wide, their arms around my shoulders. Back then, we promised each other we'd always be together. Funny how promises fade when people grow up. That day, when I closed the door behind me, I thought it was the end of my story as a mother, but I didn't know that sometimes endings are just quiet beginnings. Before that morning, before the hurt, our home used to be filled with laughter. I was only 21 when I had my first child, my son, Michael. He came into the world screaming and strong, and I remember holding him close, whispering, "It's okay, baby, Mommy's here." I didn't know much about being a mother then. I only knew I loved him more than I'd ever loved anything before. 2 years later came Lily, my sunshine girl. She had the brightest eyes, always searching, always smiling. Between the two of them, my little apartment felt like the center of the universe. We didn't have much, just a small rented place on the edge of town, one old couch, a hand-me-down table, and a lot of love. Their father, Mark, was a good man at heart, but life was heavy on him. He worked long hours at the factory, and sometimes he'd come home quiet, worn and distant. Money was tight, but I always told my kids we were rich in love. Every night, after tucking them into bed, I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea and dream of a better future for us. A home with a backyard, maybe a dog, and laughter that didn't have to be forced between worries. Those were the years that shaped me, the years when you don't rest, you just keep going because your children depend on you. I worked part-time at a diner and cleaned houses on weekends. I'd come home with sore feet and tired eyes, but the moment my kids ran into my arms, the pain faded. They'd show me their drawings, little stick figures of Mommy, Michael, and Lily. Every picture had the same thing, me smiling, standing tall with my arms wide open. I guess that's how they saw me. Strong, always there, never tired. But I was tired sometimes. There were nights when I'd cry quietly so they wouldn't hear. I'd sit in the dark kitchen and wonder if I was doing enough, If they'd ever understand how hard it was to give them everything when you felt like you had nothing. When Michael turned 10, Mark lost his job. Things became harder. The bills piled up and arguments started. I tried to keep peace for the children's sake. I'd tell Mark, "We'll get through it." But he would only nod, staring off into the distance. And then one night, he didn't come home. No note, no call, just silence. I remember sitting at the kitchen table till morning, staring at his empty chair. That's when I realized I'd have to be both mother and father now. I was scared, but I told myself I couldn't break, not in front of them. Those next few years were the hardest, but also the most meaningful. I watched Michael grow into a young man, protective of his sister, helping me carry groceries, even fixing little things around the house. He once said, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll buy you a big house. You'll never have to work again." I smiled and said, "Just be kind, son. That's all I want." And Lily, she was my little helper, always humming, always watching me cook. She'd say, "Mom, one day I'll be a chef and you'll never have to cook again." We dreamed together, the three of us. There were good days, birthdays with homemade cakes, Christmas mornings with secondhand gifts wrapped in newspaper. We'd sit around the table and hold hands, and I'd thank God for keeping us together. I told myself that love like ours couldn't fade, that once my children grew up, they'd always remember where they came from, remember me. But life moves fast. Michael graduated first. I still remember his smile that day, proud, tall, wearing that black cap and gown. I cried so much that my eyes hurt, but my heart was full. He was the first in our family to finish college. After the ceremony, he hugged me tight and whispered, "Mom, I couldn't have done it without you." And I believed him. When Lily went off to culinary school, the house became quieter. I'd walk into their rooms and see the traces of their childhood, posters, stuffed toys, notebooks, and I'd stand there wondering how time slipped away so quickly. I started talking to their pictures sometimes. Silly, I know, but it made me feel close to them. They both built their own lives, jobs, apartments, friends. I never wanted to be in their way. I was just proud. Proud that somehow, despite everything, I'd done my job. But deep down, I missed them. The calls became shorter, the visits less frequent. They were busy, I told myself. Everyone grows up and finds their own path. That's how life goes. Still, I kept their rooms clean. I kept making their favorite dishes when they came home. Fried chicken for Michael, pasta for Lily. I waited for holidays, birthdays, anything that would bring them back, even just for a little while. I remember one Thanksgiving. The year before it all changed. The house was full again, laughter echoing like before. Michael brought his girlfriend, Emily, sweet girl, polite, a little shy. Lily came with her boyfriend, Tom. We cooked together, laughed over silly stories, watched old movies late into the night. That evening, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of tea. I smiled at the quiet house, at the warmth still hanging in the air, and I whispered to myself, "They're happy. That's all that matters." I didn't know then that time was already stealing those moments, that the closeness I took for granted was slowly fading away. People say you raise your children to let them go, but no one tells you how lonely it feels when they actually do. As the years went by, I became the one calling, the one waiting, the one saying, "I'm fine," even when I wasn't. When Michael married Emily, I thought I was gaining another daughter. She was kind, respectful, and I truly loved her. I wanted her to feel welcome, to know that I was happy for them. But sometimes the ways she looked at me told another story. She was polite, but distant, always careful, always watching. I told myself it was just adjustment, that she'd warm up eventually. I didn't realize then that small distances can grow into wide spaces, and wide spaces can turn into walls you can't see until it's too late. The first time I felt the distance was over something small. It was Michael's birthday. I'd spent the entire morning baking his favorite chocolate cake, the same one I used to make when he was a boy. I decorated it just like before, with chocolate shavings on top and a tiny happy birthday sign I'd saved from years ago. When I called him, he said, "Oh, Mom, Emily already ordered one from the bakery. But thank you, that's so sweet." He sounded cheerful, but I felt the air leave my chest for a moment. I told him it was fine, that I'd bring my cake anyway. He said sure, but I could hear hesitation in his voice. That evening, when I arrived at their house, everything looked beautiful. Emily had done a wonderful job. Candles, food, decorations. She was always good at details. When I handed her my cake, she smiled politely and said, "Oh, thank you, Mrs. Carter. We already have dessert, but I'll keep this for later." Mrs. Carter. I'd been mom to her for 2 years by then, but she still called me that. I told myself not to mind. It was just a word. Still, words have a way of reminding you where you stand. Throughout the dinner, I tried to join their conversations, but they were talking about things I didn't understand. New restaurants, office jokes, people I didn't know. I smiled and nodded, trying to follow along, but my mind wandered. After dessert, Emily offered me tea. When I reached for a cup, I accidentally spilled a little on the table, just a few drops. She quickly grabbed a napkin and said, "It's okay." But I caught that tiny sigh, the one people make when they're trying to be polite. It was small, almost nothing, but my heart noticed. That night, when I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the leftover cake. No one had touched it. I wrapped it up and put it in the fridge, telling myself I'd eat a slice tomorrow, but I didn't. After that day, I started to notice little things. Michael called less often. When I did call, Emily usually answered first. She'd say, "Oh, Michael's busy right now. I'll have him call you later." Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. I told myself they were just busy building their lives, that I shouldn't expect too much. But when you've spent half your life being the center of your children's world, it's hard to learn how to stand quietly on the edge of it. Then, one day, Lily came home for a visit. I was so happy to see her. She looked beautiful, confident, her eyes still bright, but older now. We hugged, and for a while, it felt like nothing had changed. We cooked together, laughed about old memories, and watched one of her favorite childhood movies. But then she said something that stayed with me. "Mom," she began gently, "you know, Michael and Emily feel like you're a bit too involved sometimes." I looked at her confused. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "It's just, they said you drop by a lot without calling first, and it makes Emily uncomfortable." I felt my heart sink. I'd only dropped by maybe 3 times that month. Once to bring soup when Michael was sick, once to return a jacket, and once just to say hello. "I was just checking on them," I said quietly. "I didn't mean to bother anyone." "I know," Lily said, touching my hand. "They know you mean well, but maybe give them some space." That night, after Lily left, I sat in my living room for a long time. The house felt colder than usual. I looked around. The framed photos, the old furniture, the memories that had nowhere else to go. Space. That word echoed in my mind. How much space does a mother give before she disappears completely? From then on, I tried to stay away. I stopped calling every day. I waited for them to reach out first. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. Holidays became shorter, visits fewer. When they came, they often brought friends, or they'd leave early. I still cooked their favorites, but I could tell they were just being polite when they took a bite or two. Once, when Emily was helping clear the table, I overheard her whisper to Michael, "Your mom worries too much. She should go out more, make friends." She didn't mean it cruelly, I could tell. But still, it stung. How do you explain that your children were your friends, that your whole life had been built around them? Time passed quietly. I filled my days with little things: gardening, volunteering at the church, watching TV shows I didn't really enjoy. I laughed when people talked about retirement plans or hobbies. My plan had always been my children. One afternoon, I decided to surprise them. I made a pot of stew and drove to their house. It was raining lightly, and I remember thinking how cozy it would feel to share a meal together. When I arrived, I saw Emily's car in the driveway. I knocked gently and waited. When she opened the door, she looked surprised. "Oh, Mrs. Carter! We didn't know you were coming." I smiled and lifted the pot. "I made some stew. Thought you might like some on a rainy day." She hesitated, then opened the door wider. "That's kind, but we're actually heading out soon." Behind her, I saw Michael putting on his jacket. "Oh," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Where are you two going?" He glanced up, a little awkward. "Dinner with some friends. Sorry, Mom. Maybe next time." I nodded quickly. "Of course. Go have fun." Emily thanked me for the stew and set it on the counter. I stood there for a moment, wanting to say something, anything, but my throat wouldn't let me. When I turned to leave, she said softly, "Take care, Mrs. Carter." That drive home felt longer than usual. The windshield wipers moved slowly, and I could barely see through the rain. My chest felt heavy, but I kept driving, whispering to myself, "It's okay. It's okay." After that day, I stopped visiting altogether. I waited for invitations. I told myself they'd call when they needed me. But the calls grew fewer, the texts shorter. "Hi, Mom. Love you, Mom. Busy this week." That was all. Then came the day Michael and Emily had their first child, my granddaughter Sophie. When I held her for the first time, I felt that same warmth I'd felt when I held Michael all those years ago. Tiny fingers, soft cheeks, a heart beating close to mine. I thought maybe things would change now. Maybe being a grandmother would bring me closer to them again. For a while, it did. They visited and I babysat. Sophie brought light back into my days. We played with blocks, sang songs, baked cookies. I even taught her how to fold napkins into little hearts. But as Sophie grew, I started hearing things again. Little hints that I was too much, too protective, too old-fashioned. One day when Emily came to pick Sophie up, she said gently, "Mrs. Carter, please don't give her so many sweets. We're trying to cut down sugar." I nodded, embarrassed. "Of course. I just wanted to make her happy." "I know," she said softly, smiling. "You're wonderful. Just less sugar, okay?" I agreed. But that night, I cried quietly. It wasn't about the cookies. It was about feeling like a stranger in the very family I helped build. Then one evening, Michael called. His voice sounded serious. "Mom, we need to talk." And in that moment, I felt a chill. The kind that comes before something you don't want to hear. When Michael said, "Mom, we need to talk," I knew something was ending. He came by that Sunday afternoon. Emily was with him. They sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I used to serve them pancakes and hot cocoa when they were kids. But this time, no one smiled. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, like it was counting down to something I didn't want to hear. Michael cleared his throat, looking at his hands. Emily sat very still, her fingers folded neatly in her lap. I offered them coffee, but they both said no. That's when I knew it wasn't just a visit. Finally, Michael looked up. "Mom," he began softly, "Emily and I have been talking. We think maybe it's time you moved into your own place." I stared at him, not understanding at first. "My own place? What do you mean?" Emily spoke then, her voice gentle but firm. "You've been staying here for a while now, helping with Sophie, and we're so grateful, truly. But we need some space as a family, to grow." I opened my mouth to say something, to ask why or how or what I had done wrong, but no words came. Michael reached across the table, his voice soft. "Mom, you've done so much for us. You deserve your own peace, your own life. We'll help you find a nice apartment nearby." Peace. It was such a kind word, but it felt like a door closing. I looked at my son, the little boy who once cried for me when he scraped his knee, the teenager who promised to take care of me when I was old, and I saw that he wasn't that boy anymore. He was a man now, with his own world, his own walls, and I was standing on the outside of them. I tried to smile, though my lips trembled. "Of course," I said quietly, "if that's what you need." Emily exhaled softly, relieved. "Thank you for understanding, Mrs. Carter." Mrs. Carter again. It sounded final this time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the rain, thinking about how strange it felt to be unwanted in the very home I helped build. The same hands that once built forts out of blankets, cooked meals, wiped tears, now packing boxes in silence. In the morning, I started folding my clothes. Each one carried a memory. The blue sweater I wore at Michael's graduation, the scarf Lily gave me one Christmas, the apron I used when Sophie and I baked cookies. I placed them gently into a suitcase. Emily came in quietly. "Do you need any help?" I shook my head. "No, thank you. I know what to take." She hesitated. "You're a wonderful mother, you know that, right?" I smiled faintly. "I try." There was kindness in her eyes, but also relief, and that told me everything I needed to know. Michael came in later, holding a small envelope. "Mom," he said, "there's some money here to help with rent until you get settled, and I'll come by this weekend to help you move." I looked at the envelope, but didn't take it. "Keep it," I said gently. "You'll need it for Sophie." "Mom," I interrupted, "it's okay. I'll manage." He sighed, his eyes wet. "You're not mad, are you?" I smiled. "No, son. You're building your life. That's what I wanted for you." He hugged me then, tightly, the kind of hug that says more than words ever could. I held on a little longer than he did. When he pulled away, I saw the guilt in his eyes, but I also saw something else. Love, buried under the weight of duty and growing up. The day I left, the sun was bright. Too bright for the way my heart felt. I loaded my suitcase into the back of a taxi. Emily stood on the porch with Sophie in her arms, waving. "Bye, Grandma," Sophie called out, her tiny hand waving with excitement. I smiled and waved back, pretending my heart wasn't breaking. Michael came down the steps and hugged me once more. "We'll visit soon, okay?" "Of course," I said. "Drive safe, both of you." The taxi started moving, and I watched the house shrink in the rearview mirror, until it disappeared completely. When I arrived at the small apartment they'd helped me find, it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that echoes. I unpacked slowly, folded my clothes, set my old photo frames on the counter, pictures of the children when they were young, smiling with frosting on their faces, holding up Christmas presents wrapped in newspaper. I ran my fingers over the glass and whispered, "You were my whole world." Then I sat on the couch, looked around and realized I had nothing to do. No one to cook for. No one to ask, "How was your day?" Just silence. In the evenings, I would make tea and look out the window, watching families walking together, children laughing, parents calling them back home. Sometimes I'd imagine that was still me, calling out, "Michael, Lily, dinner's ready," and hearing their voices answer back. But imagination only holds you for so long before reality catches up. Weeks passed, then months. Michael called every few days at first, then once a week, then sometimes not at all. Lily visited when she could, but she lived in another state now, busy with her job. I never blamed them. I told myself they were living their lives, doing exactly what I had raised them to do, to be independent, strong, successful. Still, I missed them. Every time the phone rang, my heart jumped a little. Every text that said, "Hi, Mom," was a small gift. But one evening, I saw a photo on social media. My family, at dinner, celebrating Sophie's birthday. Everyone was there. Everyone but me. I stared at that picture for a long time, then closed my phone and sat in the dark. That was the night I stopped waiting. I realized then that love, no matter how deep, can't force someone to stay close. Sometimes it just has to let go, quietly, gracefully. That night, for the first time in my life, I whispered to myself, "It's time to start living for me." And though the words felt strange on my tongue, they were the beginning of something I didn't yet understand. Because sometimes, the moment your heart breaks is also the moment you finally find yourself. The first morning in my new apartment, I woke up to silence. No footsteps in the hallway, no one calling, "Mom," just the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. For the first time in years, I had no one to take care of. It was both strange and freeing. I sat by the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky gold, and whispered to myself, "Well, I guess it's just you and me now." At first, the days were long. I tried to fill them with small things, cleaning, cooking simple meals, watching the news, but everything felt hollow. I'd catch myself setting the table for 3 instead of 1. Old habits die slowly when your life has always revolved around others. Then one afternoon, the manager of the building, a kind older woman named Grace, knocked on my door. She said, "We have a community garden out back. You should come by sometime." I almost said no. I wasn't good at meeting new people. But something in her voice felt warm, familiar, almost motherly. So the next morning I went. The garden was small, tucked behind the apartment complex. There were raised beds full of tomatoes, herbs, and sunflowers that swayed gently in the wind. A few other tenants were there, older folks mostly, chatting and laughing as they worked. Grace handed me a pair of gloves and said, "You can take that corner bed if you like. It's empty." I smiled. "Thank you. It's been a while since I've planted anything." As my hands sunk into the soil, something inside me stirred, a feeling I hadn't felt in years. The earth was cool and soft, the air full of life, and for the first time since I left my son's house, I didn't feel empty. I spent that whole morning there. I planted marigolds and basil, watered the beds, and even shared stories with the other gardeners. They talked about their children, their grandchildren, their lives. And I listened. quietly, gratefully. By the time the sun started to set, my heart felt lighter. Days turned into weeks, and the garden became my little world. I woke up early every morning, made tea, and walked outside to check on my plants. It gave me purpose, and little by little, I started smiling again. One afternoon, as I was trimming some herbs, Grace came over and said, "We're organizing a bake sale next month. You make anything sweet?" I laughed softly. "I used to bake a mean chocolate cake." "Well," she said, grinning, "then you're in charge of dessert." That night, I stood in my tiny kitchen, mixing flour, sugar, and cocoa the same way I had for my son's birthdays all those years ago. The smell of chocolate filled the room, and for a moment, it felt like home again. When the bake sale came, people loved the cake. One man even asked for the recipe. I hadn't felt that proud of myself in a long time. After that, I started baking more. Cookies, pies, little treats for neighbors. They began calling me Ms. Mary from 2B, the lady who bakes the best brownies in town. I laughed every time I heard it. I wasn't Mom or Mrs. Carter there. I was just me. And that felt good. Then one Sunday, while I was arranging flowers in the living room, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice sounded unsure. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, keeping my tone light. "How's everyone?" He hesitated. "We're good. Sophie's growing so fast. She misses you." My heart tightened, but I smiled. "I miss her too." There was a pause, then he said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have called sooner. We just needed time to figure things out." I closed my eyes. His voice was older now, heavier, but still my boy. "It's okay, Michael," I said softly. "I understand. You're doing what I always wanted for you, living your life." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sophie's birthday is next week. We'd love for you to come. She keeps asking for Grandma's cake." I smiled through the tears that filled my eyes. "I'll be there," I whispered. That week, I baked that same chocolate cake. Rich, sweet, simple. When I walked into Michael's house, Sophie ran straight into my arms. "Grandma, you came!" Her tiny arms wrapped around my neck, and all the pieces of my heart that had been scattered for years seemed to come back together. Emily greeted me, shy but sincere. "It's really good to see you." I smiled. "You too." There was a quiet understanding in her eyes, maybe even regret, but I didn't need an apology. I had already forgiven her long before that day. We sang happy birthday, shared cake, and left together. Michael kept looking at me with that same boyish grin he used to have, as if to say, "Thank you for still being here." When it was time to go, Emily walked me to the door. She said, "I'm sorry if we ever made you feel unwanted. We were just trying to figure out how to be parents ourselves." I nodded. "I know. It's not easy. You're doing a good job." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for forgiving us." I touched your hand gently. That's what mothers do. When I got home that evening, the apartment didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt peaceful. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the sunset paint the sky with shades of orange and pink. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something or someone. I was simply living. Over the next few months, life became beautifully ordinary. I kept baking for the community, tending to my garden, visiting Sophie every now and then. Sometimes Michael and Emily dropped by to see me. Other times I'd video call Lily and listen to her stories about her restaurant. Everyone had their own lives, and so did I. One afternoon, as I watered my marigolds, Grace said to me, "You seem happier these days." I smiled. "I think I am." For the first time in a long while, I like who I am when I'm alone." She nodded. "That's the best kind of peace." I learned something in those quiet years, that love doesn't disappear when people drift apart. It changes shape. It grows softer, quieter, less about holding on and more about letting be. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what hurt you. It's about deciding that the hurt doesn't get to control your heart anymore. I still miss the old days sometimes. The laughter, the noise, the feeling of little hands tugging at my dress. But I've made peace with the silence too. It's no longer empty. It's full of memories. When people in the garden ask about my family, I smile and say, "They're doing well. They're happy. And so am I." And I mean it, because life doesn't stop when your children grow up. It just changes direction, sometimes painfully, sometimes beautifully. And if you give yourself enough time and kindness, you'll find that there's still so much life left to live, even after your heart has been broken. It's been 9 years since that day. The day I left my son's house with a suitcase and a quiet smile. 9 years since my heart cracked open and started learning how to heal. Sometimes I still think about that morning, the way the sunlight touched the kitchen table, the way my hands trembled as I held that towel. It used to hurt to remember. Now it just feels distant, like an old song you still know by heart but don't need to sing anymore. Life didn't turn out the way I once imagined, but it turned out the way it needed to. These days, my mornings are simple. I wake up early, open the curtains, and let the light in. I make tea, water my plants, and feed the little birds that come by my window. Sometimes Sophie visits. She's 9 now, bright and curious, just like her father was. She loves to bake with me. Every time she stirs the batter, she giggles and says, "Grandma, you make everything taste like home." And that, right there, is enough. Michael and Emily come by more often now. We share dinner, laugh about old memories, and talk about life. There's no awkwardness anymore, just quiet understanding. Time has a way of softening things. People grow, hearts change, and love finds its way back through the cracks. Sometimes Lily calls from her restaurant, her voice full of energy. "Mom, we're on the local paper today. They loved my new menu." I smile every time. "Of course they did," I tell her. "You've always had a good heart. That's the secret ingredient." She laughs, and for a moment, it's like she's still my little girl sitting on the counter, swinging her legs and watching me cook. It's funny how life circles back in small ways. How pain can plant the seeds of peace, and endings can quietly grow into beginnings. I don't have everything I once dreamed of. No big house, no noisy table full of children running around. But I have something quieter, something real. I have peace. And I've learned that peace is not the absence of sadness. It's the presence of acceptance. There are still days when I miss the sound of my children's laughter echoing through the house. Days when I walk by the park and see families together and my heart aches just a little. But I remind myself that love doesn't end when people move on. It just lives in different rooms now. Sometimes, when the sun sets, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sky turn shades of gold and pink. That's when I think about the woman I used to be, the one who cried quietly in her kitchen, wondering where she went wrong. I wish I could reach back in time and tell her, "You didn't fail. You just loved deeply, and that's never a mistake." If you've ever felt left behind, if you've ever watched the people you love grow away from you, please remember this. You are still someone's home, even if they no longer live under your roof. You are not forgotten. You are not useless. You are a chapter they'll always carry, even if their story has moved on to another page. Life will break your heart, yes, but it will also teach you how to rebuild it, stronger,
softer, wiser. You'll learn to fill your own days with meaning. You'll find kindness in strangers, comfort in simple mornings, and joy in small victories. And one day, you'll wake up and realize that peace has quietly moved back in, not because the world gave it to you, but because you made room for it.
At 40, my children rejected me. At 49, they came back. Not because they had to, but because love always finds its way home when it's real. Now, when Sophie laughs in my kitchen, when Emily hugs me goodbye, when Michael calls just to ask about my day, I don't think about the years I lost. I think about the love that returned. If I've learned anything, it's this. Family isn't about being needed every day. It's about being remembered, quietly, tenderly, in the way someone says your name when they talk about home. And that's enough for me.